we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to hit subscribe so you know when the next videos are coming out. We always want to hear from you in the comments or in the DMs on our Twitter or Instagram. If you ever wanted to reach out to us and let us know how you feel about an episode or critique or whatever, harangue, or even if you wanted to hear a special topic, we can always cover that. Check out our Patreon too, patreon.com/bigmarkpod. Again, I'm still kind of reworking things there, but stay tuned. There's going to be some changes over there. But like I said, if you ever wanted to hear a topic, always let me know. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. My buddy Nick from work, we were working out tonight, and I was kind of asking what should I do for an episode, and he gave me this idea. So if it's a bad one, it's his fault. Watch out, Nicky. But really excited for tonight's episode. We're going to be talking about film adaptations. I didn't know exactly how to title this one. This is kind of one of those ones where I just didn't want to take up too much and give too much away all in the same title. So it basically, Nick and I and Chelsea, Nick's partner, we're kind of chatting today at the gym, and we're saying, you know, generally speaking, you know, many animated films, especially that are adapted to live action, stink. They fucking suck. There's no doubt about it. Although Nick did say One Piece is the exception. So if you are listening to this and you know exactly what I'm talking about, Nicky says One Piece is the exception. So if you know any other films that were adapted to live action that are actually good, drop it in the comments. We want to hear about that, because I haven't really seen that. And that's the thing, is that a lot of animated films that are out there, you know, like, you know, there's been so many just animated films. I couldn't even list how many great ones that are out there. But the biggest issue with animated films to live action is obviously the mechanics of animated. You know, you're able to do so much more in that world of animation. You're able to do so much more as far as what the characters look like, what the characters are able to do. You know, you just need voice actors, right? That's the only kind of human element that you have, and you can create basically any kind of visual element. It can be completely created right then and there. You know, there has been a lot of animated films to live action that have been kind of hit or miss. I remember as a kid watching Rocky and Bullwinkle, which was, you know, kind of an old school, I guess, I don't know if it was Hanna-Barbera. I think it might have been, but it was, you know, old school serial cartoon that I think made a bit of sense. I mean, at the time, I think it was kind of restricted by CGI. And that's the thing, is that we're starting to see more movies now that are trying to reach and go for these adaptations, because CGI is quote unquote getting better and better. But again, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, as good as the CGI can possibly get, like, there's going to be that uncanny valley where we can kind of discern, oh, look, that's obviously a person in front of a green screen. That's obviously something that's been manipulated. You know, even when you use somewhat practical effects, depending on the world that you're trying to portray, it's never really going to look exactly like, because there's a level of a leap of faith, so to speak, when you're watching a cartoon. You can still kind of be like, oh, okay, that's, you know, I'm obviously watching a representation of something that isn't actually real, it being a cartoon, but when you're watching something that's real, I think there's a lot less room, or we're not as easily fooled. I'll get to that later. I don't want to give away too much right now. But again, Rocky and Bullwinkle, The Last Airbender, like Avatar, terrible. Again, that's what Nick was saying. Absolutely brutal. Speed Racer was one that they tried, which, that it kind of makes sense. Just fucking basically like a racing movie. Great. The Flintstones, not bad. Again, this is like Serial World, but they really leaned on those practical effects, and it was cartoonish still, because that's always what you're always left kind of with that choice as a filmmaker, is like, are we gonna really try to make this seem real? Like, I think we'll get to this in a minute, and I've talked about this in other podcasts. Go check out podcasts. There's 168 other podcasts to binge, so go get after it. But I talked about this in like comics, Marvel, DC, anytime that comes up. I believe when the filmmakers were deciding in the DC universe how to create what they were going to do, they decided, all right, we're going to try to make things seem as real as possible. Like, what if these superheroes actually were in the real world? Let's try to tighten things up as much as we can without, again, losing the entire story, which is arguable in some cases. But let's try to make this seem, again, there's obviously will always be a leap of faith, because there's no fucking aliens that have laser beams that shoot out of their eyes and fly around, no matter how much they try to make it seem like it comes from some type of explainable physics in our universe. I don't even know what the fuck that means. And then Marvel, I think, still, in some of their movies, obviously, like Captain America, Winter Soldier stuff, you can be a little bit more lifelike because you're not really doing too much superhero shit, but they had the Hulk and Thor and things like that. So they still kept things more like, all right, this is a completely made up imaginative world. We're not trying to trick anybody. We're just going to fucking show a guy in a metal suit flying around, getting after it, and all the other doings that do. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute too. So again, I think with the Flintstones, they really chose to lean into that. Like, let's kind of still make it look like a comic. I mean, even in the Hulk, when Ang Lee did the first Hulk, I think it was Ang Lee. Anyway, when they did the first Hulk movie, like before the Incredible Hulk, with Ed Norton, the Eric Bana, Bruce Banner vehicle, they kind of lean more into like, oh, we're going to try to make this seem like a comic book came to life. And right, like that's always been the trouble with like comics, is like, oh, we're going to try to make this seem like, oh, this is coming to life. But again, when you're adapting already an animated movie, not just a comic book that's on a page, you're already adapting something like that. And like, to me as a kid, like Spider-Man and Batman, like those guys existed in like the animated series, so that's kind of how I knew them. So I'm sure the filmmakers took some of that into the case too. Scooby-Doo, again, obviously, all these like Hanna-Barbera-esque movies seem to be easily transferable to film. I don't know. One of the Scooby-Doo movies, at least some of them, were really were good as far as being like, oh, this is a pretty good kind of, oh, it's just situations, like a sitcom, I guess, like situational adventures, serial adventures. So those make sense, I think, when you're going to film. George of the Jungle, classic, Brendan Fraser, what up, my G? Fat Albert with Kenan Thompson, again, really interesting, where you're really trying to mesh this dude who's like clearly like a comic book character into like the real world. And that was like a little bit of like, I think I saw that. I watched it a long time ago. I think he kind of gets brought into the real world in that. I'm not sure. That's another like angle, I guess, when you're making these movies, is you can be like, oh, these people were taken out of their existing world in the animated world, Space Jam-esque, or like Last Action Hero. You're taken out of the world where you exist in that universe and you're brought into ours in some way, or our universes are crossing or something like Pleasantville, things like that. Not that that's an adaptation. That's a bad example, but those movies again are kind of those ideas of you're like crossing over and bringing two universes together to try and reconcile, being like, yeah, you can bring attention to being like, yeah, that's fucking weird that you're able to fly or that you're a superhero or whatever. Master of the Universe classic. I'm sure that made most sense. Like just in general, I'm sure when, I can't remember when the last Master of the Universe came out, but I don't think they've done a really modern one in a while. But anyway, you know, Masters of the Universe is worthy of a whole episode, a whole other podcast episode, just because it's this whole idea of like creating this holistic kind of consumerist ideal of like, we're going to make a toy that's also featured on the show that all these kids like, and and they're going to have these characters that are, again, also part of the show, and blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to have this movie, and it's just going to be this idea of like this, just pushing fucking kids and parents to buy toys and watch movies and have fun. But, you know, they did an adaptation of the comic to that, but that kind of, again, makes sense in general. As far as like, oh, we're going to bring this, but I mean, it does look a little bit janky though. Like now that I'm thinking about Master of the Universe, I'm thinking back to the one with Dolph Lundgren and, that one dude, I can't remember. I think he was in Law and Order or something after. But he played like the skull face. Fuck. Oh no, Master of the Universe. I'm out of my depth here, people. I'm sorry. Anyone who's screaming at this and tell me who the hell that guy is. That guy who comes in and talks like this. I kind of just remember him basically from Robot Chicken. He is like, he kind of looks janky in the movie if I'm now thinking back. Like the makeup is kind of whack, the effects are kind of whack. So that's the trouble. And we come back to all these pitfalls, right? This idea that in the animated world, especially in the digital world, like I remember, like you're in the digital world and in the animated world, you're just able to do so many things that you'd never be able to do in live action. I remember when the Matrix animated series came out, the Animatrix was like this like addendum to some of the, I think it was between the first and second or after Revolutions, can't remember. But I just was like blown away as far as like the animators did a really great job of kind of taking the Matrix story and really expanding upon it and then using the medium of animation to explore completely new depths and completely new realms that you'd never be able to do with live action film. Or again, it's just harder and harder to do. Never is always hard to say, right? Because again, you know, we talk about comics, but there was a lot of other comics that adapted to film. I mean, Indiana Jones, I don't think was actually a comic before, but it's based on all these adventure comics. So those make sense, right? Like all those adventure comics and stories, you can bring them into the world where it doesn't take too much effects. It doesn't take too much, like you're not creating new worlds that don't exist, you know, ancient Egypt and things like that. Yeah, obviously you have to build sets and create that, but you're not creating like new interplanetary, interstellar worlds that you can do with animation or ancient spiritual things. And again, it's timeless. You can cross time. It's kind of much like literature in that way. But I remember watching like The Phantom as a kid with Billy Zane, classic. I was just talking with my buddy Justin at work about that. But classic adaptation of an adventure character. But yeah, he wore this like kind of purple suit, and me and Justin were talking about this today. It's always really tough with characters, comic book characters, and it seems to be pretty ubiquitous, if you will, that have like a cowl kind of thing. You know, Spider-Man, if you will, has like that hood. You should call it a hood too, but characters that like wear something over their head that is like so fucking skin tight that like it's kind of physically impossible that like it, like, and the lines that are drawn in it, like you'd have to have some structure under it. Or like, yeah, just the way it moves with you, or the way it's like, there's some that have like crazy, like widow's peaks essentially on them, that, you know, that are like glued. Like it's just sometimes so impossible. I'm thinking of the Phantom specifically, and like little glasses and things. And again, there's just different ways, or I guess they're not glasses. They're like, that would be like your mask. Shit. Anyway, it's like all these different elements are really, really easy to draw and show on the comic book on the page. But when you bring them, they have to be this material, and then they get bulky and it looks weird, right? So the Phantom was a little bit of a victim of that. Spawn, I don't know if you remember that, the McFarlane comic Spawn, really, really interesting, super dark, super heavy. I remember watching that as like a mad little kid. Probably shouldn't have been watching it, but hey, you take that shit in. V for Vendetta, I didn't even know that was a comic. I guess like some of these are also like graphic novels, right? Like The Watchmen, that's like, you know, a graphic novel. Kind of makes perfect sense that it's eventually going to become adapted to film, because it's basically like a really intense storyboard, a graphic novel. Like, but again, there's only so much you can do. And I mean, Snyder did a fantastic job with Watchmen, and in the television series was great too. But again, even the television series did Dr. Manhattan super interesting, and the movie I think the movie did Dr. Manhattan pretty well. But again, you still have to do these heavily intensive CGI scenes that are like taking absolutely amazing. And like, it's arguable that those scenes are almost like an animated scene. It's basically like a scene from an animated film that's just interjected into a live action film. So again, there's limitations, right? There's so much you can do. 300, excellent, but Matt, that was I guess a pretty good example of like, you can get the amount of people out there and really push it. Lord of the Rings, you know, when we talk about literature, I mean, we can talk about books to film all day. I mean, books to film are always harangued, right? I mean, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was this weird kind of like one-off comic. Popeye, love Popeye. Like, there's tons of those movies that are kind of from like strips, and Robin Williams was amazing. But that's the thing, like The Grinch, you have to have these people who are like unbelievable actors that are just going over and above to even come close to the performance, or like how it comes across in these movies and novels and television, all this stuff, right? Like again, like books alone, like there's rarely times where people are like, oh yeah, like that was the perfect result, you know, that captured everything from the book. Like Lord of the Rings is kind of one of those ones that come to mind where it comes close. But even then there's people who are like, oh, fucking Peter Jackson fucked that shit up. And like, it's like, holy hell, the guy came really close to bringing that absolutely amazing, fantastical, beautiful world to life, and did it again, arguably not as well, you know, in The Hobbit. And then people have taken it and started to try to do things with Rings of Power. But again, that whole adaptation, that world has been kind of set up from Peter Jackson's, right? Peter Jackson's original adaptation, I should say. But that's the hardest part, is that it's real. It can be so difficult when adapting something like a book to film, because there's so much information that can be portrayed through words that you can't portray in film, like in a reasonable amount of time. Right now we have this world that we live in of series and docuseries and mini series and things like that on streaming platforms, where you can do like an 8 episode, 1 hour per episode series where you have 8 hours to go over a story and really get into the depth of like one book kind of thing. So there's limitations, right? And I think that I've spoken about this before, but there is this whole idea of, you know, there are levels. I haven't put the perfect name on it yet, but there are levels of entertainment information. And what I mean is there's ways that artists and writers and filmmakers and comic book writers and everybody who is creating art that is being portrayed in that sense, and we're trying to intake that information, is entertainment information. I don't know. Bear with me. Maybe the picture will come together. If not, it's Nick's fault. So I kind of started at like spoken word, the oral tradition. That's kind of like the first bit of starting information. It's kind of how we like at least first learn how to take stories in anyway. But when someone's telling you a story, you're listening to their words, but you have to completely come up with the image in your head, right? Like they could be telling you a story and you have to kind of imagine what's happening. Whether they're a good storyteller or not can really affect that, obviously. But then you have books and literature, where I've talked about it before in a completely separate episode. You can, you know, time dilates. You can, you know, you can spend an entire chapter on a single moment. You can cross thousands of years of time in a couple paragraphs, right? Like size and and the depths and expand and outer reaches that you can go to in volume and idea, and just the worlds you can create is what I'm trying to say in literature are so infinite that it really has to, you know, that give and take between the author writing those words on the page and you taking that in and them painting a picture for you, if you will, it with their words creates this landscape in your head that again is extremely, extremely difficult to perfectly accurately adapt to film. And I think a lot of that also has to do with just like when I first, you know, what's a good example? It's a series of unfortunate events. When I first read a series of unfortunate events, what I pictured the Baudelaire orphans to look like wasn't exactly what they looked like when the actors were cast. I think they did a great job. In fact, Count Olaf was practically exactly what I thought. I mean, there was illustrations, and it's tough with those kids' books that have like illustrations on the cover. So I guess I was thinking they looked like the illustrations at least. But that makes it even harder. That's why casting superheroes are so hard, is because we basically know what the superheroes look like already. And if we cast someone who doesn't exactly look like that, it's even harder. But if you read Lord of the Rings for the first time and you thought Aragorn looks like whoever you thought Aragorn looks like and not Viggo Mortensen, you're going to be like, who the fuck is this guy? So again, books are so hard. I think the next level again is comics, because it's kind of giving you at least more of an accurate. I don't want to downgrade this. I don't want to make this seem crass, but I think as we go down the levels here, it's almost more like how each level is like, how is the information being presented to you? How much work does your imagination have to do for that information to get into you? Again, it's kind of like, are we drinking through a straw, or are we drinking through a fire hose? And like, how much of that information is being spoon-fed to us, so to speak. So comics, again, kind of gives you a little bit more than information. It's telling a story, but it's also showing you the visual, but you have to obviously imagine the pieces moving. And then you have theater and play, I think, is another level where your imagination, obviously, you're taking that leap of faith of like, oh, obviously, it's not just people talking to me on stage, not just other human beings standing there. I'm imagining that stage is now this whole other world. And there's a little bit more kind of leaps of faith, especially with like some set design, and with like, especially some plays that have like minimal set design where it's just like a fucking chair and a guy comes out with glasses on and fucking, you know, anyway, So, but again, they're kind of showing you more, and there's some theater that goes wild, like Phantom of the Opera-esque, Lion King level performances are really showing you all this. But again, you have to kind of take that leap of faith, and there's another give and take there between you and the actors there. And then movies and film are of course showing you these landscapes as best they can. You know, obviously does a great job in real life, where there's not a lot of CGI involved. You're basically watching a play, but in a very, very accurate setting. Anyway, and then of course animated film is involved in that too, but again, that's just like it's kind of really showing you the whole picture. You don't have to imagine too much. Yeah, obviously you're still giving into the fact, like, yeah, we're watching actors say and do things that they don't really mean or someone else wrote for them, and everything's staged and everything is in its right place, and someone created that set and someone created that scene, and so much thought and things were meticulously put into that. We have to kind of like not really think about that unless you care about that stuff, and be like, oh, okay, this is really happening. Like, you know, there is an attack of aliens on New York City and the Avengers have to save the world. Again, if you want to go along with the story and be entertained, you just sit back and let the filmmakers take you with. And sometimes it's upsetting when the filmmakers take you down a fucking dark road. But that's the responsibility, is that they're taking you down. And sometimes, you know, with some of these books and comics and theaters, and people are like, oh, I didn't get it. It's like, oh, you have to think about it, or there's deeper meanings. And it's like, oh, not everyone gets it. And some people do, and some people don't. There are different levels of understanding all through it. And film, it goes for films too. And I think the ultimate level, at least right now, until we create something even more immersive, is kind of like VR, I guess, or like those like 4D rides where like you're in a seat that's moving and there's senses hitting you and you're smelling different things and you're feeling wind and cold and there's sensory input. I think that's kind of the ultimate, where again, you're not having to imagine anything. You're experiencing that fully entertainment of being like, oh, and who knows, maybe we're doing that right now and this is all simulation. And one day we're just going to take off the goggles and be like, all right, let's move to the next game. But that's for another podcast. Actually, I did one on that called Simulation Theory. Go check it out. A few podcasts ago. But anyway, like I said, drop in the comments if you ever wanted to, drop in the comments if you know of any movies that were good film adaptations, or if there were even bad ones. Let us know. Drop it in the comments. Like I said, put that shit in the comments. Please help us. No, again, thank you so much for listening. Again, thanks, Nick, for the suggestion. This was great. Thanks to y'all for spending your time here. You know, you could have been anywhere else in the world, and you were here with us tonight. Again, Instagram, Patreon, YouTubes. Love y'all. Peace.